Hi, boys and girls. This is going to be our first lesson on steps in a procedure or in a process. When we're talking about steps in a procedure, we're talking about doing things in a certain order. When we are learning about doing things in a certain order, we use what is called transition words. Transition words are like first, second, third, next, then, finally, and after. There are other examples too, but these words help us to keep our writing or the things that we're reading in an order that makes sense. I'll give you an example of writing using transition words with the story we see on this picture. First, a little boy goes to the field to pick some tomatoes from his garden. First, he picks some tomatoes. Next, he carries them home in his basket. After he carries them home, he goes into the kitchen. The second thing he does is he starts a pot of boiling water. After the water is boiling, he adds in the tomatoes until they are nice and soft. Finally, the boy takes all of the tomato sauce and turns it into pasta sauce that he puts into jars. Once they're all in jars, he gives them to his family and friends. The end. Now don't you see how during this story I used words like first, second, third, then, and finally to give you an order to what was happening? Using those words makes it much easier to understand the order in which things happen. If the boy started pulling out some jars and just opening them on his counter, that wouldn't make sense for him to be the first thing that he did. He has to have tomatoes in order to make the sauce. He has to boil the water in order for the sauce to become something to put in the jar. So the order that he does things is very important. We're going to use our prior knowledge or what we already know to help us understand this new thing that we're learning. Our prior knowledge is that you may already know that certain things often happen in a certain order. We know that it makes more sense to put toothpaste on our toothbrush and then start brushing our teeth than it does to just stick the brush in our mouth, right? Order in which we do things makes sense. So we already know that. Here are some examples. Mr. Smith teaches a PE class. First, he has his students warm up by walking laps around the field. Next, he has them play a game, such as soccer. Lastly, he has them cool down with stretches. They use transition words such as first, next, and lastly to help you understand the order. It wouldn't make sense for him to have the students cool down at the beginning of their PE lesson, right? First, they would need to do something physical like soccer that would make them tired, and then they would cool down. So it just makes sense that events will happen in an order. Here's our next example. It says, Susie was making cookies. First, she gathered all the ingredients on the list. Second, she mixed them all in the mixing bowl. Can you guys think of what those transition words are from that passage? Go ahead and think about it and write down your answer. What are the transition words that we see? The transition words that you should have found are first and second. If we look here, it says, lastly, she blank. We need to fill in our own answer. So, Susie was making cookies. First, she gathered all the ingredients on the list. Second, she mixed them all in the mixing bowl. What do you think that Susie could do lastly? Think about your answer and write your own sentence down. Lastly, she blank. What could she have done? My idea is lastly, she put the cookie mix on a sheet to bake, right? She would take that batter that she just made and turn it into cookies by putting it in the oven. So that's what she would do last. All right, now here's our next slide. It says structure. Structure is a new vocab word. Structure is the way that something is organized or built. Buildings and homes can be built in many different ways. When we're talking about structure, we're talking about order, just like our topic is called order of events in a story. When we're talking about the order of events, we're talking about its structure. Do you think it would make sense for your house to have carpet on the ceiling and bricks in the middle of the floor scattered everywhere? No, that would be crazy, right? So structure is important when we build our homes. They're built in a way that makes sense. They're built in the right order. First, they put down the bricks, then they would put down the flooring, then they would build the walls, then they would build the roof on top, right? It would all make sense and flow. That's the same thing that we're learning when we are talking about the structure of a piece of writing. So when we're reading something, we have to think about how it is being organized. And when we're writing, we have to organize our writing in a way that makes sense too. Here's another slide about structure. Structure is the way that something is organized or built. Writing can be organized in many different ways, just like a building could be built in a different way. Some ways are cause and effect, sequence, and comparison. These are different types of writing that an author might use. So when we have cause and effect writing, that is like saying, first this happens, and then it causes this to happen. So because this first thing happens, another thing can take place. That's like saying, because the gardener watered his plants, they grew into beautiful roses, right? The reason that the roses grew is because the gardener took care of them. So that's an example of cause and effect. Our next example is called sequence. That uses our transition words that we practiced in our very first slide. Sequence means the order in which things are happening. So for example, first, Billy went to his garden and picked the tomatoes. Second, he made a pot of boiling water and put the tomatoes in. And finally, he turned the tomato mush into tomato sauce, right? That's the order in which things are happening. Sequence and order, that's what they mean. They mean the same. The last one is called comparison writing. You can see on this picture some apples and some oranges, right? We could compare these two types of fruit with a writing piece. We could say both of these items are fruit. However, the apple is white inside and the orange is orange inside, right? The apple and the orange can both be made into juice. We're saying how these two fruits are alike and how they're different. These different types of writing you will see in all the different pieces that we read. You'll also write them on your own, right? If you're comparing your brother to your sister, how are they alike? How are they different? You would use comparison writing. If you're telling me the steps that you take to get ready in the morning, then you would be using sequence writing. And if you were telling me why you got sent to the principal's office, then you're telling me cause and effect. So what happened that made you go to the principal's office? That's telling cause and effect. We're still talking about structure or how a story is organized. So sequence structure is a way to organize writing, and it shows the order in which things happen. Here's our example with our friend out in his garden. It says, James wanted to make some jam. First, he went out to the backyard and he picked an entire basket of raspberries. Then he mashed the raspberries. He put them in a pot on the stove and mixed them with sugar. Finally, he took the heated raspberries off the stove. He placed them in separate jars and let the jam cool. This is the order in which the events are happening. We have first, he went out to the backyard and he picked those berries. Then he mashed them and boiled them in a pot. Finally, he took the heated raspberries off the stove. Can you write down those three transition words that we found in this writing? Go ahead and write them on your paper. Our transition words are colored on these passages. We have first, then, and finally. Each of these words tells us the order that something happens. I wouldn't say finally at the beginning of my writing. because that's something that would tell me that the story is almost ending, right? I wouldn't say first at the end of my writing, because first tells me that the story is just beginning. So these transition words can help people understand what is happening in your story and when. At the bottom of this page, it says sentence sequence structure is a way to blank. Sequence structure is a way to organize our writing, okay? Or organize the things that we're reading in a way that makes sense. We're going to be doing some practice pretty soon with sequence structure. Sequence writing is often uses signal words or transition words. Here are some examples. We have first, second, third, before, after, later, first, then, and finally. Each one of these words helps us know the order in which things are happening. Sequence writing often uses signal or transition words. Sequence writing can be used to write instructions or recipes. This way, people know the order in which to put something together or accomplish a task. If you were writing a recipe on how to make the best strawberry lemonade, then you would tell people the order in which they had to do all of the steps so that they could make the recipe just like you did. The better that you explain and the more transition words you use, the better people will make that lemonade just like you did. There are many apps to choose from on a variety of topics. First, go to the Play Store. Second, search for the topic of your choice in the search box. Third, click the Install button. Enjoy your new app. So, what did this paragraph teach us? Think about that answer. What did this paragraph teach us? It taught us how to download an app on our phone or iPad, right? These are the steps that we would take. We use transition words like first, second, and third to help you know what to do and when, right? First, you go to the Play Store. Second, you search for the topic. And third, you click the install button. Then you'd have a new app, right? Pretty simple. Sequence writing can be used to write blank. What's the answer there? We can see that at the top. It says sequence writing can be used to write instructions or recipes. This way people will know the order in which we're going to do something. All right, our next story is about Abraham Lincoln. This is a caricature or a silly picture of Abraham Lincoln. Sequence writing can be used to write about history. So history, these are events that have happened in the past, right? Abraham Lincoln is not alive anymore. He's a part of our history. He's a president from a long time ago. This way, people know the order in which events happened in the past. So we read about Abraham Lincoln still because he's a part of our past, and we read about what he's done to help us understand the order in which things happened in our past. Okay, so I'll read you this next paragraph about Abraham Lincoln. And as I read, I want you to be thinking about the transition words that are used in this passage. Abraham Lincoln had a memorable life. In the beginning, he was born in Hodgenville, Kentucky, on February 12, 1809. He lived in a one-bedroom log cabin. Later, after encountering hard times, his family moved to Perry, Indiana. Indiana, that's where we live. Finally, when he was older, he became the 16th president of the United States. Okay, so knowing this is a piece of our history. Think about Abraham Lincoln. He was a president. Do you think he was a president first, or do you think he was a student first? Which one of those things did he do first? The answer is he was a student first, right? He went to school first, then he became president. Did he live in Kentucky first, or did he live in Indiana first? The answer is he lived in Kentucky first, that's where he was born, but then he moved to Indiana, where we live. So the order that things happened is important, right? The order of the events tells you what happened in his life and when, what led him to be president, right? All those different events in his life. So our transition words that we have here are in the beginning, finally, and later. We're going to be talking more about sequence writing. So sequence writing can be used to write directions. This way people know the order in which streets to drive on. So if your mom or dad were going to take you to the beach, they might ask someone for directions, or they might look directions up on their maps, right? It would be really important though that they would read that map in order. If they read, oh man, take a left onto Main Street, but they weren't anywhere near Main Street, they would have no idea what to do. So we need to write all of our directions in order so that it makes sense. So here's an example of someone that's written directions. This says directions to North Palm Beach. First, head straight on Jackson Avenue. Then, turn left on Cargo Street. After that, turn right and head north on Tropical Lane. And finally, Tropical Lane will dead end into North Beach. So each one of those steps was marked with a transition word. We have first, then, after that, and finally. All of those words tell you when something is happening, right? First is the thing that we did number one. Finally is the very last thing that we did. So those transition words help you understand what to do and when. It's very important. All right, here's an example. Mr. Carter's friend was trying to give him directions on how to get downtown so they could meet for a business lunch. He told him, first head left on Palm Street, going south. Stay on this street for 3 miles. Second, turn left on Gregor Street. This is a one-way street. Finally, turn right on 7th Street. The restaurant is located on the right side. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the sequence signal words. So let's look and find those signal words. Can you find any in there? Everything that's said in a quotation mark is using a signal word. So the first one that I see is first. First, head left on Palm Street. This is the number one thing that that person would do. The next signal word is second. Second, turn left on Gregor Street. This is a one-way street. And finally, turn right on 7th Street. The restaurant is located on the right side. These are all of our transition words. Number 2 says determine the sequence of events. So our sequence of events are the order in which the events happen. This man tells his friend, hey, let's meet for lunch. That's the first thing he does. The next thing he does is give his friend directions in order. And finally, his friend would come and have a lunch with him. So you have to be able to find those sequence words and those transition words in your passage, and then you have to be able to explain what happened and in the right order. So you have first, you head left on Palm Street. Second, you turn left on Gregor Street. And finally, you turn right on 7th Street. So those are the steps in this process. Benjamin Franklin accomplished many things during his life. First, he was born on January 17, 1706. He was born in Boston, Massachusetts. Then, when he was older, he invented bifocal glasses. Bifocals are glasses that help you to see both near and far. Later, Ben Franklin helped draft the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution contains written laws for the United States. So, this is a piece of history. This is something that really happened. This man you see here in this picture, that's Benjamin Franklin, and he really lived a long, long time ago. When we read this, we can use transition words or signal words. So let's find those words in our story. We have first, then, later. These 3 words tell me the order in which things are going to happen in his life. These things already happened, so now we can think about the sequence of events or the order in which they happened. So first, he was born on January 17th, 1706. Then, when he was older, he invented glasses. Thank goodness for him, right? Now I have glasses. And later, Ben Franklin helped draft the U.S. Constitution. These are our steps in order. First, Ben Franklin was born. Then he invented those glasses. And last, or later, he helped make the U.S. Constitution, which we still use today in our country. Pretty cool. Here's another example. This says, Chef Marco is going to make spaghetti tonight. Before he gathers his food, he will boil water in a pan. The boiling water is being prepared for the noodles. After that, he will heat the meat sauce in a pan and noodles in the boiling water. Make sure you continually stir both items. The sauce may pop if it is not stirred. Lastly, take the noodles and the meat sauce off the stove and mix together. Enjoy the delicious pasta. If you notice, while I was reading, I circled those transition words or those signal words. I circled before, after that, and lastly. These are the order in which those things happened when our chef was making the food. So, before, he gathered his food and he boiled water. After that, he heated the meat sauce and the noodles. And then lastly, he took the meat sauce off the stove and he mixed them all together. These are the steps in order that he used to make that pasta for us. Here's our first example, and once we're done with this, you're going to do 2 more examples on your own worksheet. So our example says, Pocahontas is a famous Native American. She was born in 1595. She was the daughter of a chief. In 1607, English settlers came and started a camp. John Smith was one of the leaders there. He was taken by the Powhatan soldiers. Pocahontas saved him. She made things better between settlers and her people. She was only 11 years old. After saving John Smith, Pocahontas came to the camp. She gave them food and gifts. She helped keep the settlers alive. She met a man named John Rolfe. They got married. Pocahontas changed her name to Rebecca. One day they went back to England. There she got to meet the king and queen. Sadly, she got sick in England and died. She was only 22 years old. This young woman is still remembered today for her bravery. She helped America's first settlers. So, this is the story that we read, and now that we've read the story, we're going to think about the events in the story in the order they happened, and then we're going to answer the questions. So the first question says, who was Pocahontas? You will answer that on your own worksheet after I've read it for you. Our second question says, how did Pocahontas help the first settlers survive? And our third question is, why did Pocahontas get to meet the king and queen of England? Your next story is how to make hard-boiled eggs in a recipe. What you need: a big pot with a lid, a kitchen timer, a medium bowl, a spoon, and 4 eggs. Here are the directions. First, get the items above and wash hands. Second, put the pot on the stove. Fill with water. Place the eggs in the water. Turn the stove on and bring the water to a boil. Put the lid on the pot and turn off the stove. Fill the bowl with ice cubes and water. After 10 minutes, move the eggs to the bowl of ice water. Use the spoon. Let them cool for 5 minutes. Step number 6. Take the eggs out of the cold water with the spoon. Softly roll the eggs onto the table to crack the shells. The shells should peel off easily. Number 7. Rinse with water and eat. Then you will answer these 3 questions here on your own worksheet to answer about what the steps in order are. Here's your last passage, Life Cycle of a Frog. You will read this passage on your own and then answer the 3 questions here. Happy learning!